Hello and welcome. Joining us next is Sumant Sinha. Sumant, I just want to begin by asking you, conversation around energy and sustainable energy, clean energy has been one of the dominant factors here at Davos as well. What have been the key takeaways for you from here?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because over the years, slowly, the salience of the whole clean energy space has increased, as of course has the whole concern around climate change. And the fact that renewable energy and clean energy in general is one of the sort of fundamental pillars of that solutioning, I think is really what is driving this focus on clean energy going forward. One of the key takeaways for me really is the fact that energy security has become as important as the whole climate change issue was earlier, at least for the short term. It will be. Also given the fact that we're sitting here in the heart of Europe, and Europe is of course the most impacted by the whole Russia-Ukraine war situation, which is causing them to totally rethink their entire energy paradigm. And I think that that concern is coming through. So I think what we're likely to see is in the short term, ramp up of any energy capacity, which is not Russia, and in the medium to long term, an even bigger focus on renewable energy as being the longer term solution. Now, how all of that radiates into the rest of the world is something that we'll have to wait and see.
Right, and in what form? That's also important. There's been a big debate of wind versus solar, green, hydrogen versus blue. That seems to be the conversation around here as well. Your thoughts?
No, look, I think there's no contradiction between wind and solar. I think, or there's no conflict. I think both of those have to go together, as have any other sources which are non-fossil fuel oriented. So nuclear is also, I'm finding more conversations around nuclear, especially small nuclear reactors. Hydro, to the extent that it can be ramped up in the longer term, is something also that will probably be a part of the mix. And then there are certain carbon removal technologies that are also gaining traction. Those are much more expensive right now. Like direct air capture or carbon sequestration and storage. So you burn the fossil fuel, but instead of letting the carbon go into the atmosphere, you just capture it right there and then store it, right? Or you just have, giant, frankly, I don't even know how it works, but you just take, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and you take it out and store it. So those technologies are also now getting more prominent. So there is a fairly broad-based effort now to develop clean energy technologies in a fairly broad sense, because I think we need all sorts of solutions to deal with this whole issue.
India at the moment is at perhaps a very interesting junction. We are, just to quote here, world's third largest renewable energy producer, but also the third highest carbon emitter in the world. So which way are we really going here?
Well, India also is the third largest economy in the world on a purchasing power basis. So I think it's perfectly fine if you're the third largest carbon emitter. But the bigger issue is that not what is the situation right now, but what might it be a few years down the road. Because as India grows, and India has the right to grow, right? Because we have a large mass of, our per capita incomes are very low, our per capita usage of power is very low. It's a third of the global average. So I think India still has to do a lot of development. And as we do that, and if we follow the traditional path of development, that will actually increase our carbon emissions from 8% maybe to 15% of global carbon emissions, right? And we just can't have that. So India has to find this unique solution, which no other country in the world has done before, which is to grow, but in a decarbonized manner. And that's really going to be very, very interesting to see how we're able to manage that. It's a pretty interesting challenge. But if India can do it, then following right behind us is that entire continent of Africa, which is, by the way, also 1.4 billion people, same as India, right? So we can actually set a framework or a new method of growing in a carbon light manner or a carbon free manner. That will then become the template for a lot of the rest of the world.
Interesting, challenging, both the things that go along here. I also wanted to understand how crucial is battery storage in the entire value chain as well at the moment.
It's pretty important because obviously renewable energy, we all know, is intermittent. And therefore, as you have more and more renewable energy in the grid, how do you balance the grid? So, of course, gas is one way of doing that, but we don't have cheap gas in India. So the only other way of doing it is to store the renewable energy for some time and then feed it into the grid. And that storage therefore requires batteries in large measure. And so that's what we require. Now, keep in mind that batteries are also required for the electric vehicle industry. And in fact, if you look at the projections and the forecast of all the battery installations over the next, let's say, 15 to 20 years, almost 75 to 80% will go into electric vehicles, and only about 25% will go into stationary storage.
Right. I'm very glad you mentioned EV because that's an area that's also one of the focal points here in India as well. But there is a full question on how clean really are these batteries. At the end of the day, even the batteries used in EVs, what happens to them at the end of that battery cycle?
Yeah.
And is that really clean?
Yeah, no, look, that's a great question. And I think the whole issue of a circular economy and disposal of waste is an area that needs a lot of work. I agree with you. And today, I don't think there are really good solutions. You can, of course, take a lot of the batteries and recycle them, but recycle the materials, the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, whatever else there might be. And first of all, decrease the need for new mining of these metals, right? But secondly, the question is you don't know how much technology might have changed 7 or 8 years later. Maybe we won't be using any more lithium or cobalt any longer. And so then what do you do with this? So that is something that will have to be explored. But look, I'm sure what will happen over time is that you'll, new companies will develop, new business models will develop where the collection of these batteries and materials from those are going to become businesses in their own right.
Right. Lastly, really, when you talk about batteries being used, at this point, the cautious call perhaps by the government that has been taken is to make it standardized. What I'm hearing here more and more is the question on innovation, if that really puts that back on track with battery swapping. Your thoughts?
Look, I think there'll be a mix of everything again because it's going to be a very big industry. And therefore, you will need battery swapping. You will need batteries that can be just sort of charged wherever they are inside the vehicle, whether it's a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler. So you'll have all of those different technologies that will evolve. So we'll have to wait and see because, it's a question of how rapidly you can charge those batteries. If it takes a long time, then people are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to be hanging around waiting for like 2 hours or something like that to charge my battery. And if you can, in the meantime, come out with technologies where you can just, push something in and take something out, then that might be the way to go. So we'll have to wait and see.
Is there some magic trick that you have at the moment that you can share on at the current economic crisis that rejig that we're really seeing across the globe and the cost it will have on sustainable development?
Yeah.
Is there a magic bullet really?
No,
to fight
there isn't,
this?
Unfortunately. The world is what it is. It's a complex, almost like a living being, and we are heading, to my mind, for slightly difficult times because interest rates are going up, inflation is still pretty high. And in trying to control all of that, central banks, which are a little bit late to the party, may end up dealing with things when it becomes a little bit too late, and that might lead to an overcorrection on the other side, and that might lead to a sudden fall off in growth. But whether that cools off inflation or not, because it's inflation shocks are sort of supply chain driven, all of that remains to be seen. I think we'll just have to wait and watch and be very careful and cautious in the next 9 to 12 months.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking with Moneycontrol.
Thank you.